So I know you're expecting Jessie, but hey, hi, I'm ARANOCK. I'm the editor on this video specifically, and Jessie's often script editor, co-writer, and creative partner. Point is, I'm here to deliver a disclaimer that became necessary partway through production. So before we begin, this essay was filmed during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, the works being covered here wouldn't exist. Jessie and myself fully support both the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their fight for fair treatment and compensation against a system that continuously denies them such. While a full boycott has not been called for, SAG-AFTRA has asked that everyone who does media about film and TV refrain from promoting struck work during this time. From what Jessie and I can tell, based on guidelines released, independent art analysis does not constitute promotion of work, but critical assessment of a work of art. Any praise given to these works should be seen purely as praise for the artists, writers, and actors who created it. If anything, the praise is emphasizing that the writers, actors, and other artists deserve more compensation because they are who make these works possible. Additionally, this video was not made using any studio-provided screeners or material. Do not support any studios during the strike.
Hey, what's the matter with you? Feel right, huh? You feel right, baby. I think I scared my cat. He's running away from me over there. Sorry, had to do it. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a perfectly imperfect movie. When I stepped out of the theater after seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I don't know if I could have expressed precisely what this movie made me feel beyond telling you that it made me feel seen in a way I don't think a Marvel movie has ever done for me before. But that is the point, because Volume 3 is a film about being seen, how we come to see ourselves, and how we must fight for that right to define ourselves for ourselves. So, very resonant with any queer person in America. And Eldritch Horror monsters as well, now that I come to think of it. Unfathomable abyss pride, everybody. Many of the central characters of most MCU movies are symbols of ideas or personifications of systems. Captain America is an idealized version of US ideals.
This isn't freedom. This is fear.
And his stories are about how that idealism often bumps up against the realities of the world that he inhabits in the present day.
S.H.I.E.L.D. takes the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be. And it's getting damn near past time for you to get with that program, Cap.
For your consideration, the Jericho.
Tony Stark embodies American individualism and the idea that billionaire great men will save everybody.
How do we put a suit of armor around the world? Around the galaxy?
It reinforces myths about capitalism, neoliberalism, and the American government's position within international affairs. And many of Tony's films act as direct recruitment strategies for the American military. The same for Thor, a child of a monarch who will one day rule the kingdom, for which Thor must wrestle with his history within Odin's legacy of imperialism and what that means for himself and his brother, who, by the way, we all stand here. Did a whole video on that as well. If you like this cosplay, go check out that cosplay, because I got Loki cosplays for days. Even many of the Marvel movies in Phase 4 and 5, with the rare exception of films like Black Panther 2, have all started to feel more like products of the system of the Marvel Cinematic Universe rather than film entries unto themselves, with works like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania/CGI Fest feeling more like a setup for the next big event than a work of art interested in telling its own story. So what makes Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 so very special, so fucking special, is it's because it's about the creeps, the weirdos, the people who don't belong here, people who have never been able to have control or a perfect body, who feel left out, how they are all made to feel imperfect. And yes, I was quoting Radiohead there. But the film is about the fact that these broken people feel this way because they are products of systems that violently attempt to define them and who they are for them. From Star-Lord to Mantis to Drax to Gamora to my gal Nebula to Cosmo the best dog ever to Kraglin to, of course, Rocket Raccoon, each of our characters have been traumatized by systems or individuals who represent systems, and traumatized for the benefit of worlds that these systems attempted to force into being. And these traumas alienated these characters not only from others, but from understanding themselves. And despite escaping these systems all the way back in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, they feel they don't have a tie to who they are, where they came from, or more importantly, who they wish to be. All of them have been running away from something, oftentimes themselves. And I'm going to be joined in this discussion by my amazing friend and collaborator, ARANOCK, who has her own thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 as well. Because we're living the themes of the movie, which is finding connection with people that we care about. I like ARANOCK. ARANOCK's cool. She's good people and I adore her. Volume 3 is also targeted directly at fighting not only the fictional systems these beautiful people came from, but the real-world systems of domination and control outside of the film itself, particularly criticizing America. Like, believe me, this film says some shit, and that surprised me because I cannot believe that Marvel let James Gunn get away with it. Sure, it's not James Gunn's DC Comics series Peacemaker, where he literally ends the show with the heroes fighting cops and neo-Nazis, but I repeat myself. Yet Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 comes as close to unequivocally calling out American policies as I think I've ever seen a Marvel movie do. Even arguably, though not definitively more so, than the Black Panther films, given that those movies do some significant level of CIA aggrandizement within them. See the fantastic FD Signifiers videos for discussions on that, by the way. But off in their little corner of the galaxy, and within the little corner of the film franchise of the entire MCU itself, outside of the systems both diegetic and market, the Guardians could find themselves and define themselves for each other. And this leads me to the most important thing about the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. The reason the Guardians of the Galaxy movies generally, and the overall work of filmmaker James Gunn, continually resonates with me, is the fact that they're always centered on empathy. It's this empathy that caused me to do a 2.5-hour video analyzing the works of James Gunn through his own experiences as a person and director, and how all of his films are about him struggling with his own self-identification in a world that denied him that chance, and finding empathy for himself, and through that finding empathy for others. And Gunn, I think most particularly in Volume 3, really wrestled with the understanding that we are all beautiful, imperfect beings that are made whole by being able to define ourselves through our relationships with others, with people who see the real us, even if we don't see the real us ourselves. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 feels like the perfect end to the journey of the entire franchise, and the start of a new one, for both James Gunn as a filmmaker and our perfectly imperfect Guardians. Alright, before we get started on the essay portion of this video, I just have to say, I hope this Nebula cosplay comes out looking halfway decent, because this is literally my first time attempting this cosplay ever. But since we're talking about my gal Nebula, let me also tell you about another Nebula that's got my back. No, that's a bad transition. I am currently in the midst of producing and directing a film that I wrote called Identities. It's a science fiction film quite literally about some of the similar themes that we're going to be talking about in this video on Guardians of the Galaxy, about how being able to fight to see ourselves is ultimately what lets us fight back against systems that try to define us. It's going to be what I hope is a very hopeful science fiction movie starring some amazing actors, including Abigail Thorne of Philosophy Tube, Jessica Nicole from Fringe, Maggie Mae Fish from Also Here on YouTube, and John Delancey from Star Trek. Yes, again, Q from Star Trek is going to be in a movie that I'm directing. It's really, really crazy and kind of freaks me out, but is amazing.
He's back!
But the entire reason that I'm going to be able to make this movie is because it is being funded and distributed by Nebula. Nebula is an online streaming service created by me and my fellow YouTube creators to be able to make videos without us having to worry about the system and algorithm of YouTube. And it's got amazing things on there, such as Abigail Thorne's The Prince play, which is a multiverse Shakespeare transgender queer play that you all need to check out, as well as Nebula classes that helps others learn how to make their own content as well. But most importantly for me, they help fund really amazing and wild projects like my film Identities. And I would not be able to do things like that without them. By signing up at the link that is hopefully somewhere on this screen between my non-blue hands right now, you can get yourself a discount for signing up for Nebula, as well as let Nebula know that you are signing up to support me and my film and all of those who are working on it. It's a win-win-win-win-win situation for everybody, and hopefully allows me to be able to do even more beyond this one film of Identities. So please consider signing up and getting yourself all those cool perks. But anyways, there's just a lot of nebulas. Let's talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
My beloved raccoon. This story has been yours all along. You just didn't know it.
I feel a lot of personal connection to the Guardians films and their characters. For example, when I was 14, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she's all good now, has been for a long time, but that affects you at that age. And so when I was 16, sitting in the theater for the first Guardians film, not knowing what to expect, the opening hit me like a truck. I really understand Peter here. Adult Peter, however, is not someone I connect to much, especially as I've gotten older.
Great. Look, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I forgot you're here.
When we first meet him in Volume 1, he's an ignorant little man-child, constantly whining,
Star-Lord, man.
making inappropriate jokes,
If I had a black light, places look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
and generally being full of himself.
You have the bearing of a man of honor.
Well, I wouldn't say that. People say it about me all the time.
And much of that comes down to him having been brought up with the Ravagers, and specifically with Yondu,
Scared, 'cause you're soft! In here! Here, right here!
who we see in the first Guardians films is an emotionally manipulative, uncaring father figure, with the Ravagers themselves in that movie reflecting him. The Ravagers there are mostly men who thrive on competing with other Ravagers, and are only there to make money and do violence, even going so far as to kidnap and traffic children, as we later learn in Guardians 2, which puts them as even too toxic for other Ravager clans outside of Yondu. As a result of all of this, as well as made crystal clear in Guardians of the Galaxy's holiday special, the precursor to Volume 3,
I hate Christmas!
Peter never got to actually express who he truly was as a kid, because he was always trying to live up to Yondu's version of who he should be. And this was further helped by the fact that Yondu took Peter from his home on Earth. Peter has never really had a connection to his heritage, his home, his family, where he came from. His only real tie to that history is a single photograph of his mom, himself, and his grandpa, as well as the mixtape given to him by his mom, something that he does constantly play in order to cling onto some semblance of self-identity outside of the Ravager's culture, tying him to his past. And this is akin to something that I spoke about in my recent video series on masculinity, as it relates to the concept of whiteness. So go check out that video for more info. But one way this relates to the real world is that in the United States, many young white men are drawn to cultures of masculine dominance and control by the fact that they are often cut off from their own history and culture and pressed into this idea of being white, which becomes akin to whatever the dominant culture is, as whiteness is ultimately not really tying anyone to an authentic heritage, but meant to try to assimilate you into the dominant American worldview. Thus, many young men fall into this radicalized world of masculinity, into these competition mindsets of control, domination, hierarchical thinking, and capitalism, all in order to live up to a culture that they are told that is their own, when in reality, their true heritage and cultural history has been stolen from them. Yet some can find connection to themselves through tokens or communities elsewhere, as Peter himself starts to do through his mixtape.
I'm finishing this so we can listen to tunes while we work.
I listen to music all of the time. As soon as I had a device, which was also a gift from my mom, I had headphones in. And it was only when I was older that I realized it was how I dealt with sensory issues due to being autistic. But I think I also used it in a similar way to Peter. It helped me not to have to think about certain things to some degree.
Why have you been fatting with the other boys again, baby?
Little Peter getting in fights because other kids were being cruel. This was also really relatable, especially to my younger self. As said though, I relate less to Peter and far more to the other characters, especially Gamora, Nebula, and Rocket. And with these films being a trilogy about Rocket according to the third film, I think it's worth reappraising the first two films through that lens before we analyze Volume 3. So what is Rocket's journey, and why do I connect with it so much?
But these townsfolk can't protect themselves.
I got you killed.
I can only afford to lose one friend today.
He didn't chase him away.
Hope Daddy isn't as big of a dick as you, orphan boy.
What has the galaxy ever done for you?
All of them in a big hurry to get from something stupid to nothing at all.
Rocket, when we first meet him, is, to say the least, fairly negative towards society, mocking random passers-by until he gets the bounty for Peter, not to mention...
I live for the simple things. Like how much this is gonna hurt.
But he does have a connection, Groot. And he calls cops fascists, so he can't be all bad.
Subject 89P13 calls itself Rocket.
Note the dehumanizing and incorrect use of wrong pronouns for Rocket, and how Rocket is a chosen name, one which reflects who he is and not what he was created as. Yes, I'm actually doing a trans reading of Rocket. You thought I'd show up in a video and not do a queer reading? You fools. Anyway, Rocket has escaped 22 prisons. His life is defined by being put in boxes that he doesn't belong in. And some of you might shrink back at me saying that a prison is a box that a criminal doesn't belong in, but no one belongs in a prison. It's dehumanizing and horrible. He also doesn't like having his body seen by others. Do I really have to explain how that connects? He is performing strength and ego, a rough exterior to make sure no one fucks with him. Something he learned to do because of society, especially considering what we learn of what he was like when he was young in 3. He's representative of where some closeted trans people end up. Alone and angry and performing a false self in order to survive. It's relatable to me, at least. Rocket's not a good person, and a bit of an ableist dick, getting Quill to steal someone's prosthetic leg for no reason other than he thought it would be funny. While yes, the film is framing Rocket as a jerk here, it's still making a joke of stealing disability aids, something the series has an unfortunate habit of repeating. And as a lot of disabled people with more applicable lived experience have discussed, it's not okay. I remember when the Christmas special released, for example, a lot of disabled people with similar disability aids talking about how they've been harmed by people doing this exact thing in real life to them. It's not a joke. You wouldn't think it's funny if disabled people came and stole your body parts, would you? So don't do that to other people. I can't believe that needs to be said. Returning to the analysis, escaping the prison is the first time Rocket acts as the person propelling things. However, as shown a second later, that was mostly for himself.
Screw this, then. I ain't waiting around for some human with a death wish.
He's also clearly dealt with a lot of mockery over what he is.
Keep calling me vermin, tough guy. You just want to laugh at me like everyone else.
When you've been mocked and belittled and put down for a long time, it makes you defensive. It messes with you.
Well, I didn't ask to get made, to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster.
Rocket's pain over being made is also relatable on a trans level. I didn't choose to be this way. I didn't choose what puberty did to me. I didn't even know choice was an option.
Let's see if you can laugh after 5 or 6 good shots to your frickin'.
And I get him here. I really do. I remember one time when I was 13, this one kid who had belittled me and bullied me for a really long time purposely stood on my desk with really, really dirty shoes and called me slurs again. And I just couldn't. And I pulled the desk out right from under him to make him smash into the ground because I wanted to see him try to mock me from his back. And that type of pain causing, it comes from a really hurt place. And I'm not proud of it, but I think it's well represented within these films. We see this frustration again briefly when the Collector calls him a pet, belittling him. Rocket at this point is so deeply jaded and hurt that he can't bring himself to care for anything. He's been running from his feelings for so long that he doesn't even know how to approach them.
What has the galaxy ever done for you? Why would you want to save it?
We see him give up on Gamora when she's been out in the vacuum too long.
But there's nothing we can do for her.
But unlike in previous moments, there is sadness and care in what he is saying here. And then he pleads with Quill to go back to his pod because as much as this moment is about showing the change in Peter, it's also about showing the change in Rocket. And he's truly worried that Peter might die here. He cares about Peter.
Everybody's got dead people. It's no excuse to get everybody else dead along the way.
It's an interesting line in the context of where Rocket's journey will go in the second film, because he struggles with similar demons to Drax. He is slowly opening himself up to caring about others, even if a bit reluctantly. Rocket learning to care about others again, after the pain he went through that we will learn about later, really starts here.
I know they're the only friends we ever had.
He also does a poor job trying to save Peter and Gamora, but he's trying to save them from the Ravagers. The reason he's struggling with this is because he represents what the group is. Because the Guardians are losers. As in folks who've lost stuff and that's heavily impacted them.
Our homes, our families, normal lives. And usually life takes more than it gives, but not today.
And that's pretty relatable when you've dealt with a lot of trauma. For the first time, for all of them, they're being given something. A chance.
To give a shit, not run away.
I think it's in the central conceit of the first film's collective character arcs where Rocket, as a central element of the trilogy, really lies. He is the character who is failing the most with dealing with his trauma in healthy ways and how it pushes him away from people and makes him shut off caring for others.
No, Groot! You can't. You'll die. Why are you doing this? Why?
Here we see the hard shell that Rocket has formed completely shattering. And not because of alcohol, but because of genuine vulnerability. He can't understand why Groot would sacrifice himself for someone else. He's also desperate for Groot not to leave him because he's already lost so many people. And this is Groot showing him that there's more than just his need to survive.
I called him an idiot.
I think for those of us who've lost a lot of people, we all have somebody like this. Someone we lost and we didn't quite get those last words correct. And after the fight, Rocket cries and he accepts comfort from Drax. He's found people he can finally be at least a little vulnerable with. All of the Guardians have found a family, but unfortunately growth and change, it's not linear.
What if I see something that I want to take and it belongs to someone else?
And with that, it's time to talk about one of the hardest parts of reconnecting with other people and healing when you've been traumatized. Regressing and pushing people away.
They're worth thousands of units apiece, which is why the Sovereign hired us to protect them.
Guardians 2 opens with clearly establishing its priorities. It's about family. The action's all in the background. The focus is on our disastrous crew's child and how they all interact with him. The film is action sci-fi second, personal family drama first.
Family reunion, yay!
The purpose of this mission was Gamora getting Nebula out of the Sovereign's hands, after all. We'll come back to the battery-eating creatures and the Sovereigns later. Focusing in on Rocket here, he's stolen some of the batteries. In so doing, he puts the entire crew in danger. Then again in the ship, because he wants to be seen as the best. He wants to be valued. Quill and him fighting over who gets to control the ship nearly gets them all killed. Because, get ready for this reveal, the villain of Guardians 2 is Ego. No, not the literal guy. I mean like the concept, the idea.
It's metaphorical!
And again, we see Rocket struggling with what he is and with being labeled.
Don't call me a raccoon!
Across the galaxy, we see Rocket's foil in this film, Yondu, who is lonely and disconnected from those he once held as family, all because he took the wrong thing, in his case transporting Peter and the other children of Ego.
If you think I take pleasure in exiling you, you're wrong. You broke all our hearts.
When you have to cut someone off that you care about deeply, it's an awful experience for everybody involved, but unfortunately some people make it necessary through their actions, by their crossing of boundaries.
Yondu Donta, I have a proposition for you.
The Sovereign hires Yondu to go after his own kid's family.
Even where I reside, we've heard tell about the man they call Star-Lord. Even that triangle-faced monkey there.
And of course, Ego, the man, insults Rocket's ego, the concept.
Hope Daddy isn't as big of a dick as you, orphan boy.
And that pushes him further towards pushing everyone else away.
What is your goal here? To get everybody to hate you? Because it's working.
Rocket at this point is lashing out because he doesn't know how to deal with his emotions or feelings. He is taking self-destructive actions because he doesn't know how to exist in community with other people. He's so used to being in a constant state of being hunted that he feels more comfortable when he is dealing with stressful situations, something we see in the section where he fights all the Ravagers. He's in his element here, and that's sad. When you've been in a traumatic situation, in a lot of fight or flight for a really long time, you kind of get used to existing in a state of emergency, to the point where being out of it, you don't know how to deal with that. Am I talking about Rocket or myself here? You decide. Basically, since moving into the place that I currently live in, that's what I've been confronting within myself. It's the first time I've been in a space that I feel safe. To be clear, there's still a lot of difficulty. I struggle to pay rent and food and medications, and I have to deal with my CPTSD, which is never fun, and my chronic illness giving me a day off would be fucking incredible, but I feel safe for once. I have supportive friends and family, including chosen members like my sister Jessie. So I relate to the feelings Rocket is struggling with here. I don't do the things he does here, but I get it. I get the impulse, and when I was much younger, I did push away people because I didn't know how to deal with them being kind, because I was so used to people abandoning me. When you've been abandoned a lot, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where at least if you push them away, you have control for once. You have the power. They can't hurt you like you've been hurt before. However, even if Rocket is struggling with that, he has still grown from the first film.
Give me your word you won't hurt Groot. I'll tell you where the batteries are.
Rocket here, without hesitation, gives himself up to protect Groot.
We ain't stupid enough to help kill the Guardians of the Galaxy.
And Yondu, as Rocket's parallel, in turn risks himself to try and protect the Guardians. This act costs him his crew and position.
You're the one what killed those men by leading them down the wrong path. Because you're weak.
The violent masculine persona focused on ego that we see Rocket, Yondu, Peter, and to a smaller extent Nebula and Gamora struggling to perform and deal with, is externally embodied in the antagonists Taserface and Ego, and to a lesser extent the Sovereign and her people.
It's metaphorical!
Rocket mocking Taserface reflects how Rocket's been mocked by others, and they both respond with violence and aggression.
I couldn't stand to set foot on an Earth where she wasn't living!
Over on Ego the Planet, Ego the Person is a conversation with Peter, where Peter expresses his anger and his feelings, and Ego rejects them and belittles them and denies them.
You can't imagine what that's like!
I know exactly what that feels like! I had to watch her die!
Peter, in essence, is a character that has been running from that pain his whole life. It's why he ran from connection for so long, because Peter and Rocket are foils, both of them at the end of Guardians 1, learning to reach out and connect with others.
Take my hand, Peter.
In Guardians 2, both of them are struggling with ego, but in opposite directions. Peter has an abundance of ego, but Rocket doesn't actually have that much ego. What it comes down to is that Rocket is using a defense mechanism, something you develop when you're in communities of strength, because when you've been belittled and put down for a really long time, you have to hide just how vulnerable you really are, how insecure you are. So you have to perform ego, and he doesn't know how to shut that performance off. He is struggling because he performs false ego and false confidence while internally having an incredibly low view of himself. Don't believe me? Half his lines in the first film are deeply defeatist, and he repeatedly shows in small things that he doesn't have a lot of confidence in himself.
They made us for nothing. The stupid experiments to be thrown away.
He, like many people forced to perform strength, have learned to perform ego. Seriously, if you don't believe me, think about how much of this story is about lying to the self, and how much we see of this in his direct, stated mirror, Yondu. Yondu, even as he prods at Rocket about his issues with doing things that are self-destructive, lies when asked about why he saved Peter.
He was skinny. Good for thieving.
Uh-huh.
Yondu also performs an outer shell of hegemonic masculinity which hides a more complex self. And both of our messy lads here express a lot about themselves through unspeakable violence. I think it's interesting how, with all the control Yondu has over his arrow, he strikes his crew where they hurt him, in the heart. We also see how this violence passes through generations, as we see Groot partake in this violent revenge. We see these two professional assholes bond over this violent display. But then Yondu does what both of them do best. Take things too far in a self-destructive way because they need to assert control. And he blows up the ship.
You maniac!
Meanwhile, Taserface's self-serious hegemonic masculinity is laughed at by a woman.
Taserface.
Rocket and Yondu both get people in danger through their performances of false ego. Peter, on the other hand, hurts people by having an overabundance of unchecked ego, resulting in entitlement and an unwillingness to grow and learn and change. He feels entitled to Gamora and expresses it in pretty gross ways.
That's why it would get 0 ratings!
This scene of him yelling makes me viscerally uncomfortable. Peter, as a cis white dude from the 70s and 80s, grew up on a steady diet of media that said he was the hero and the world existed for him, and that he's entitled to women. So Peter pushes Gamora away because of his ego, mirroring and contrasting how Rocket pushed Peter away earlier in the film. Peter pushes away people because his ego makes him an asshole.
I want to save Quill so I can prove I'm better than him!
Rocket pushes people away because he's an asshole due to his insecurity and distance from his ego. Both are trying to live up to an ideal created by others. Hell, even on a literal level, Rocket's journey is far from ego, and coming to ego is him doing better about caring for others. And Peter's journey is close to ego and having to get away from it for the betterment of those around him.
You can fool yourself and everyone else, but you can't fool me.
There's no scene that more heavily shows this than Yondu and Rocket on the ship.
I know you play like you're the meanest and the hardest, but actually you're the most scared of all.
Shut up!
And you push away anyone who's willing to put up with you, because just a little bit of love reminds you how big and empty that hole inside you actually is.
I said shut up!
What makes Rocket self-destructive is a mix of self-loathing, of feeling unworthy of love, and trying to perform strength instead of allowing himself to experience vulnerability.
I know who you are, boy, because you're me.
Yondu, after hitting rock bottom, is trying and succeeding to some degree in helping Rocket to gain self-awareness so that they can help others. Because the reality is that type of self-loathing is deeply self-focused and interferes with being a part of family or community in a similar way to how having an overabundance of self-glorification does the same thing.
I finally found my family, don't you understand that?
I thought you already had.
What is it, son?
My friends.
We are beyond such things.
Do you get it? Peter's ego is what's preventing him from forming healthy relationships and family connections, but the others don't give up on him for this.
We're family. We leave no one behind.
I realized while making this that the Guardian movies are just more emotionally complex sci-fi Fast and Furious.
I don't have friends. We are family.
Even with Rocket earlier in the film, his family, instead of lashing out back at him, they express concern that he's pushing them away.
You said you loved my mother.
And that I did. It broke my heart to put that tumor in her head.
Ego has the most toxic form of this pushing people away. He is so averse to connection that he put cancer in his lover's brain so she would die and he wouldn't be able to return to see her again. So to save the galaxy, Rocket has to kill his fear and self-doubt. And Peter has to kill his ego, literally. And to do that, he learns one last lesson from Yondu.
You think when I make this arrow fly, I use my head?
Yondu's power isn't found in strength. It isn't being tough. It isn't thinking. It's his heart. It was the whole time. But he was too wrapped up in that performance of strength to impart this to Peter until now. When he helped Rocket, he helped himself.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all!
It's through vulnerability that he's able to connect with family again. His vulnerability shows Rocket and Peter a way out. It doesn't make what he did in the past okay, but it shows both of these messy adopted sons that there's a path to change. Later in the fight, Ego smashes into Peter and breaks the mask. In the first film, we see Peter give up that mask to save Gamora. Both films show growth by unveiling his true face under the shield of hegemonic masculinity to find healthier masculinity beyond it. The character of Star-Lord, the embodiment of his self-aggrandizement, is shattered. Peter, by fighting Ego, is able to crack the idea of what he is, and then realize a more true self. In this moment, he specifically sees Yondu and Rocket.
I don't use my head to fly the arrow, boy! I use my heart!
And then Peter thinks about his family. His mom, Drax, Rocket, Gamora, Yondu, and we hear the chain for the second time in the film. The first time was when Rocket pushed him away, and now he's reconnected with Rocket and the rest of that chosen family. And it plays again. In a reflection of a line from earlier,
he was skinny, could fit into places we couldn't.
Groot places a bomb in Ego's chest. The killing blow to this toxic Ego is the chosen family's kid. And then we see just how much Rocket has changed.
Get to the ship!
Not without Quill! Not without you!
Listen to the vulnerability in his voice here. The sincerity. Rocket is actually letting himself express that care externally.
I ain't done nothing right my whole damn life, Rat. You need to give me this.
These two messy characters learning to express and connect with each other through vulnerability is really beautiful, and it's in this moment of vulnerability that Rocket fully accepts Yondu as part of his family.
He says, "Welcome to the frickin' Guardians of the Galaxy."
And the way Rocket says this line,
I'm sorry. I can only afford to lose one friend today.
it just ruins me. Think about how much he's had to change, how much he's had to unlearn and heal from in order to express that feeling so openly. To express that he loves and cares for the Guardians this much.
You are a god. If you kill me, you'll be just like everybody else.
What's so wrong with that?
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
Peter kills this idea of himself as the big, amazing, super important hero. He's just a guy.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Peter killed his ego, the thing that was in the way of him connecting with others.
It isn't Star Prince.
Star-Lord.
When we meet him in Guardians Volume 1, broken away from the Ravagers, he's left them in order to find himself, even giving himself a new name to try to define himself by.
You know what? There's another name you might know me by. Star-Lord.
Who?
And we see this arc mirrored in Guardians 2, where Peter learns that his father only saw Peter as an extension of himself, not Peter as a whole person unto himself. Due to his multiple father figures, Peter has never been able to define himself for himself, but only in what his fathers in his life wanted him to be. This is part of why Yondu's change in Guardians 2 matters.
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy.
Yondu also lets go completely of his mask and embraces vulnerability to his core. At the end of Guardians 2, Peter kills Ego and is able to reframe a positive view of his masculinity and self through Yondu's sacrifice, who relates himself to the feminine role of Mary Poppins, which then frames Yondu's masculinity as a protective, strong caretaker that can incorporate and accept elements of what is typically seen as feminine. thus breaking down this idea of masculinity and femininity being in competition with each other in some sort of hierarchy. This subtly reframes Yondu's masculinity in a more positive direction, one which Peter can now emulate through his familial dynamic with the Guardians.
I'm sorry I didn't do none of it right. I'm damn lucky you, my boy.
I don't know if you've ever gotten to have the beautiful experience of a parent apologizing for how they handled certain things when you were growing up, but yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this scene and the following funeral scene.
I had a pretty cool dad.
Because the Guardian films have something that an unfortunate amount of media, especially a lot of the MCU, lacks: heart and vulnerability.
But you'll never hear the horns of freedom when you die, Yondu. And the colors of a gourd will never flash over your grave.
At the end of the film, Rocket contacted the Ravagers and they give Yondu a real funeral.
He didn't let us down after all, Captain.
No, he did not, son.
Even Yondu's father came back. He forgave, in his own way. I think the Guardian films in general are about exploring where forgiveness lies. What's too far? I like that it has lines for what is too far, though. I like that those lines are built on people repeatedly choosing to not take a second chance. Ego is one of them, and we will get to 3's exploration of this later. I love that the characters of this series are a mess. A complete mess. A human mess. It's a lot more honest, and I think a lot stronger because of it. Something about these losers, these people who have lost so much, these tossed aside individuals, finding growth and healing in each other, it means a lot to me.
He didn't chase him away.
No.
Even though he yelled at him, I was always mean. And he stole batteries he didn't need.
Well, of course not.
And Rocket cries with his family, and that's the ending shot of Volume 2.
We are
The best way to break down Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is through individual characters, and the most obvious place to start is with Cosmo. She is the best dog. Yes, she is. How dare Sean Gunn not say that?
Take back what you said that I'm a bad dog.
Nope.
Well, yes, we'll get back to Cosmo and Kraglin later, but let's actually start with Star-Lord. Peter Quill spent the last 2 Guardians films learning to come into his own as a leader who isn't just out for himself, but able to find a connection with others by being willing to stand up with them, and he finds a role that best fits him through his connections to the other Guardians. Yet it's this connection that also limits him to a degree. It's why at the start of Volume 3, we see him drowning his sorrows in alcohol because he's self-pitying due to his failure to save others and his loneliness without the Gamora who died in Avengers Infinity War.
I miss my wife, Tails. I miss her a lot. I'll be back.
Peter thinks he needs her to be able to be his whole self. And it's why we see him throughout the film constantly trying to push the time-flung forward Gamora from Avengers Endgame to return to a relationship that Peter feels familiar with. The same romantic relationship that he had with the version of Gamora that Thanos killed.
All of the characters are struggling with the legacy of death, the legacy of people they have lost, with the figurative specters of the dead. For Peter, part of this is a feeling that
everyone around me dies. My mother, Yondu, Gamora.
He's avoiding this conversation, though.
And I'm only saying you are upset because so many of the people you cared about have left you. But you also left someone.
Well, you have blood on Earth. You never wanted to return there.
Again, you made me come here!
These films, as discussed earlier, explore lying to the self, and I think part of that is his avoiding confronting deaths.
And Earth is the place where my mother died in front of me.
Peter's running away from Earth and his grandpa is one demonstration of this, but another is how it causes him to project onto others what he has lost to avoid the reality of what's gone.
I love you, Gamora.
Thus, Peter is not seeing Gamora for herself, but a version of her that no longer exists, that is only about what she means to him, because he feels that version of her is what he needs to center his identity around again in order to be his full self. But all this is ultimately triggering for Gamora herself. This Gamora, due to Endgame's time travel shenanigans, is only recently free from having lived under Thanos' control. Like Ego for Peter, Thanos didn't see Gamora and her sister Nebula as full people. Thanos thinks he loves them,
This isn't love.
But he is willing to traumatize, torture, and pit them against each other and sacrifice them for his larger desires. Thus, both Gamora and Nebula are made into objects for Thanos to assert his authoritarian control and expressions of his desire to try to make the entire universe fit his image. Gamora and Nebula were just cogs in his machine. And while Gamora can recognize this trauma after Avengers Endgame, she has not understood who she is outside of that hyper-masculine, controlling, hierarchical, competitive worldview. And this is why this version of Gamora joins the Ravagers, representative of a similar type of community that she's used to, but not one that lets her explore her whole self as the other version of Gamora did, as this Gamora must always push away others and must always showcase strength through competition. And this is made worse by the fact that Peter is ultimately emotionally doing the same thing as Thanos. Certainly not, manipulating her and torturing her, but he is only seeing Gamora for what she could mean to him, trying to press her into being what he wants her to be, rather than enabling her to be her full self. This is why later in the movie Mantis, through Drax, attempts to tell Peter he needs to learn to stop defining himself through others.
You need to say to him exactly what I told you to say.
Life is a pond, and you've spent your entire life leaping from woman to woman as if they are lily pads upon this great pond. Perhaps what you need to do is learn to swim.
That actually made sense.
No, lots of analogies, Quill. Yesterday, I made a poop shaped like a fish. Even my butt is capable of making an analogy.
And while that scene with Drax is hilarious and brings much of Star Trek Discovery's Admiral Vance's poop energy,
You want to talk about oppression, you should start in your own mess hall.
It's made of our shit, We deconstruct it to the atomic level and then reform the atoms. It's pretty good for shit. And we don't have to commit atrocities for it.
yeah, that's a scene from Star Trek Discovery, and we love it. The reason that Mantis sends Drax in to say this to Peter instead of saying it herself is that Mantis believes that Peter will only listen to another man being vulnerable, given Peter's hyper-masculine upbringing.
This finally culminates in, at the end of the film, Peter accepting that he lost someone he loved, but also that this Gamora isn't the woman who died. That she's not only not his Gamora, but that he's not entitled to her. That she's her own person, and that neither of the Gamoras existed for him.
Whoever it was that you were in love with, it wasn't me.
I bet we were fun.
You wouldn't believe.
Both myself and Lady Knight, whom I discussed the film with, are glad that men are going to receive the message that women, like us, are not existing for them, wildly enough. But we did both feel that it was a little bit much getting there, at least for us as women in the audience. I think you could make an argument that men may need to be beaten over the head with certain messages. And I recognize I'm not a man, and as a woman, I didn't need it in this way. So I'm not sure if it's an issue, or if it's just a thing of,
okay, that's good. That's good. It's enough slices!
For Lady Knight and I, because we're coming at it from the perspective of queer women and not from that of men. And to be fair, Peter is a character who started like this.
I don't learn. One of my issues.
So perhaps some of that repetition is trying to show his flaws aren't completely gone, and that even if it's difficult, you can still change. I just think the stories and characters might have been slightly better served if some of the time spent on that was shifted over to exploration of other arcs and storylines. Gamora and Nebula's dynamic as sisters is one of the more interesting elements of the earlier films. And because we so rarely get to see sisters in film, I really appreciate it.
I'm a daughter of Thanos, just like you.
You alienated my favorite daughter, Gamora.
When we meet Gamora and Nebula in Guardians 1, they are deeply cut off from feelings and trying to get out of the abusive, traumatic situation they grew up in. When told about the prisoners wanting to kill her, Gamora responds,
"Whatever nightmares the future holds are dreams compared to what's behind me."
And I can understand this feeling because as much as I have dealt with both organized harassment online and hate crimes IRL since coming out, compared to what's behind me, it's a dream.
After Xandar, you were going to kill my father? You kill him, I will help you destroy 1,000 planets.
Nebula doesn't want to escape, she wants to strike back. She is desperate for freedom, but she doesn't care who she hurts to get it.
In this place,
Cleanse it.
In the second film, Nebula has a whole show of strength in order to take control and fit into the rapture masculine environment. It's a unique display of how women can also perform this type of behavior. And she probably best represents my relationship with having had to perform that out of necessity, and with growing to have a healthier relationship with my feelings and emotions and myself later on. I relate to how violence is forced onto her and how it doesn't come to her naturally, but comes from trauma.
I will hunt my father like a dog, and I will tear him apart slowly, piece by piece, until he knows some semblance of the profound and unceasing pain I know every single day.
And this continues to be the script where I am deeply unflattering to myself. When I was younger, wishing that pain back on those who harmed you is a feeling and thoughts that I dealt with. I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud that I acted on it sometimes. But this film is honest to that experience.
I do not dance.
Gamora also displays some element of this learned toughness throughout the films.
If you ever tell anyone about this, I will kill you.
The Guardian films understand that hegemonic masculinity is a performance, one which can be done by anybody. Frankly, these elements are most interesting in the relationship between the two of them. In the first film, we do see Gamora reach out to Nebula after she fights her, but Nebula's not ready for that type of connection.
Sister, help us fight Ronan!
Nebula's actually so averse to it that she literally removes her hand, something the film uses as a symbol for connection at several points.
Take my hand.
Take my hand, Peter.
We got a whole box of hands if that one don't work out.
It is fine.
Nebula gains a new hand through kindness from Kraglin.
I win. I bested you in combat.
Nebula travels halfway across the galaxy just to prove she can beat Gamora in a fight. It's the only language they know.
As a child, my father would have Gamora and me battle one another in training. Every time my sister prevailed, my father would replace a piece of me with machinery.
They were raised in an environment of hierarchy through force, but after they stop, they finally talk it out.
I don't need to tell you what you want, it's obvious!
You were the one who wanted to win, and I just wanted a sister!
Nebula saving Gamora at the end shows just how much their relationship has shifted in a positive direction from the first film. She is learning she can show care, even if slowly. I just really love this hug between them at the end of Guardians 2. The slight reluctance from Nebula makes me think of my younger brother.
You will always be my sister.
Is a line that holds a really special place in my heart. Not just because of the film, but because of my own real lived experiences. When a younger sibling of mine said that to me, it meant the world as a trans woman. I don't even remember saying it, but it was really important. And I appreciate and resonate with the promise of care from Gamora here. So when we get to Guardians 3, despite clearly having some distance as she is grieving her sister's death, she does say,
"She's not dead. She just doesn't remember anything from the past few years."
And it makes me think of that line again.
You will always be my sister.
A line that hit me in the gut at Mach 5 after watching Volume 3 and then rewatching Volume 2. Because despite both of them, in their own ways, losing their sister, they'll always be sisters. No matter how far apart they are, or which version of the other they get to know. That love is still there. Which is also where my biggest problem with Guardians 3 comes in. We spend so much time on Peter being so obnoxious towards Gamora, but we don't even get a real conversation between Gamora and Nebula in the film. Because I have a lot of feelings about siblings in film because my siblings are really important to me, and the relationship between sisters is just rarely represented. And yes, there's stuff going on in the subtext. Throughout the film, they're kind of figuring out where the other one's at. And I think the grunts show how Nebula, as the now older sister, is recognizing where her younger sister is at and respecting it. I just feel that they could have been given more in the text. That said, I love what is there.
Thanks.
But Gamora and Nebula are not the only sibling pair we have.
He's your brother.
It doesn't matter. He still doesn't listen to me.
Yeah, he has been pretty mopey ever since Gamora died.
Kraglin's actually a really interesting character that often I feel is overlooked for discussion.
And you ought to know better.
He's basically Yondu's other adopted son, and I think him and Peter are mirrors to Gamora and Nebula. Yes, really. We see him have jealousy towards Peter because Peter is Yondu's favorite son.
You alienated my favorite daughter, Gamora.
I just gotta say it this one time, Captain. No matter how many times Quill betrays you, you protect him like none of the rest of us much matter.
In the second film, he struggles with having betrayed Yondu.
I didn't mean to do a mutiny. They killed all my friends.
And hey, this shot between him and Peter at the funeral? Sean Gunn's doing so much with his face acting right here and expressing what the character's feeling. The later scene between them has Kraglin and Peter connecting over gifts from Yondu.
Captain found this for you in a junker shop. Said you'd come back to the fold someday.
Rocket grabbed the pieces and reassembled them. I think Yondu would want you to have it.
And because of this, Peter sits with his kid, listening to father and son with him, and he mourns his dad. When Kraglin cheers at the Ravagers coming to the funeral, it's beautiful.
Yeah!
Kraglin in the third film is also struggling through parallel versions of the character arcs that our primary cast have gone on in previous films. Kraglin at the beginning feels inadequate because he stands in the shadow of his deceased father and he cannot live up to the projection of what he's lost. He lashes out at Cosmo because he feels inadequate.
Telekinesis is cheating! You're a bad dog.
And he can barely affect the fight with Adam Warlock.
Who threw this thing at me?
At the end of the film, though, he sees Yondu, and in a parallel to Peter in Guardians 2,
You think when I make this arrow fly, I use my head?
He learns to
use your heart, boy.
Just like his brother, and he uses the arrow to help others, and he shows care for Cosmo, who he pushed away earlier in the film, just like Rocket with Peter. He learns the lessons of Rocket and Peter in Guardians 2. Quill is also affected by the loss of Yondu. He almost dies at the end because he dropped his last gift from his dad. The cold vacuum of space nearly kills Peter the same as it did to Yondu, and nearly did to Gamora in the first film, and I think this is purposeful. What could be more opposite to the love and warmth of family than the cold disconnect of the vacuum? And for Peter in the first film, and Yondu in the second film, and Adam in the third film, each is overcoming the hard shells of hegemonic masculinity to save someone else from that frigid expanse. I also think it's interesting to see the shift in Peter's view on family through his siblings. Speaking with his sister Mantis, he says,
You're my sister. It's all the family I want or need.
Mantis is someone who herself was also a product of Ego's control, a man who only saw her through how he could use her for himself rather than as his daughter who could be her own full person. Mantis lacks confidence in her abilities because she's never had the chance to prove herself or define herself outside of what Ego needed her to do. Without Ego, Mantis feels that she can't really connect with anybody through her own sense of identity, instead defining herself by others' needs.
And Yondu ruined it for Peter. I feel like I should do something.
As that what she's used to with Ego, caring about him and not herself. She's overly empathetic to the point of self-annihilation, unwilling to see herself and connect personally with others because she feels she has nothing to give, hence why she sends Drax in to talk to Peter. But the words that she offers Drax to tell Peter are proof of her ability to not only understand herself, but others. As everything that Drax says is not just something that Peter needs to understand, but that Mantis needs to hear and know about herself as well.
Perhaps what you need to do, Quill, is learn to swim.
The siblings, Mantis and Peter, are dealing with the issues of needing to define themselves as separate from what they get from others, as they both replace their dependence on father figures with a new dependence on those around them.
Speaking of Mantis and Drax, they are placed as a pair throughout Volume 2, 3, and the Christmas special. For myself, the scenes of Mantis and Drax in Volume 2 are generally the worst in the film.
I am hideous?
You are horrifying to look at, yes.
Drax's consistent denigration of Mantis, meant to be played for laughs, just comes across as uncomfortable and mean-spirited. As well, a number of Asian critics have discussed how Mantis plays into certain stereotypes about Asian women in media. I will put articles by Anakabe and Mimi Okabe in the sources if you want to read more on that topic. Thankfully, Volume 3 gets rid of Drax's disparaging comments and makes attempts at addressing the issues of the earlier portrayal of Mantis in Volume 2 by having her story not center around trauma, be about not just existing for other people, and making her more assertive in certain ways. But I'm not the person to judge if these attempts are successful. My friend Clark Seals, co-producer and editor for Codex Entry, did say that Guardians 2 does undeniably play into a lot of harmful stereotypes about Asian women involving docile, childlike behavior, naivete, and weakness. However, I can understand why some of these changes were made, since Steve Englehart's bizarre fetishization of Asian women should not go unchecked either. She was definitely a tricky character to hand to gun. Her origins in the Marvel Comics as a kung fu femme fatale who speaks in broken English and exists only to give birth to a boy is not exactly great. I do enjoy how she's handled in Guardians 3 more than her previous appearances. I love that Mantis is well-rounded. She has her own desires and motives. Her empathy does not make her docile, but also she isn't reduced to a sexy kung fu machine.
You're hopelessly in love with him.
Oh, no. Hey, what was your name again? Drax the Destroyer. Oh, that is such a lovely name.
I do have to say it's sad that Mantis's bewitching of a guard to be into Drax is the most explicit queerness we get in the Guardians series. Though I want to be clear, I personally blame Disney for reasons I explain at length at the beginning of my Nimona video, which Jessie also helped write. Go subscribe to my channel if you want to see that.
It is wrong to manipulate the feelings of friends.
The pair's conflict is built around the importance of being honest with each other.
And we'll ride back to the ship.
Just right over there?
Yeah.
Drax! Hey! Stop being a jerk!
And it expresses itself most strongly when Mantis makes Drax forget.
You think I'm stupid?
Yes. Forget.
And then it's just not addressed again. It feels like an abandoned thread, or like there was a scene deleted between the two. However, separate from this, their arcs are interesting.
Drax, throughout most of the Guardians films, is often seen as simply comedic relief due to his literalism, both in-universe and out-of-universe.
Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast.
This literal mindset often leads him to misunderstand situations or feel out of place outside of situations where he needs to use his strength to beat up someone. And as a result, Drax only sees himself as that, a destroyer. Yet, we also know from Volume 1 that he's only a fighter because he lost his family. Ronan killed his family in order to fit Thanos' idea of forcing the universe to half its population, taking his identity as a dad away from him, violently and traumatically. So as a result, Drax's way of viewing the world is often misplaced by the role of destroyer. As we see later in the film, he is not stupid or dumb as some take him to be, but just someone whose straightforward view of the world allows him to express complex ideas to children and kids, those who don't have the tools necessary to understand the nuance of metaphor. Kids also don't have the emotional baggage or associations that many adults have in our society today. Instead, Drax can explain an entire complex idea through emotional connection and a language that no one but he and the other kids that he's trying to protect understand. This is something that I really relate to as a neurodivergent and autistic person as well. Many people infantilize autistic and neurodivergent people, thinking that we don't understand complex ideas or that we're childlike or things like that. People even say that about me. The fact that I love nerdy, dorky things is often seen as a way to infantilize me as a autistic person, as well as mixing it with transphobia, but that's another conversation for another day. But it's not that autistic people like myself aren't able to understand complex ideas. We just say the things that we're thinking and talking about in plain and simple language quite often because we often don't bring in the connotations or baggage that other people bring into a conversation. It's why I think I'm a fairly good teacher and why I often talk to kids really well, because I'm able to express complex ideas in ways that are, resonant with people who don't have that baggage in their lives. Kids are just as emotionally complex as adults are, they just don't have the language to express it. And Drax is someone who is able to do that. And as a result, Drax can define himself again as the thing that Thanos, through Ronan, took away from Drax in his pursuit to restructure the entire universe into how he wished it to be.
I don't have another place for this, but the Guardians films use yonic symbolism specifically with birthing Drax multiple times, and
It makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
I don't know why, or what it means, but it's there, and I need other people to be
cursed with knowledge,
because I can't unsee it. I could argue that it perhaps represents that violence isn't his true self, that he's not a destroyer, but it is in fact his parental instincts which define him. If I had a nickel for every time Drax came headfirst through a yonic symbol in these films,
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
We're family. We leave no one behind.
Let's go save our friend.
We see in Star-Lord the apparent evolution in self-actualization he's gone throughout his time in the Marvel movies. He's no longer the man-child whining and making jokes.
This look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
But throughout Volume 3, Peter is the mature one on the Guardians team.
Right, we're gonna break in.
And kill anyone who gets in our way.
Not kill anyone.
Kill a few people.
Kill no people.
And he makes clear to others that the Guardians aren't out to hurt anyone.
We're here to save the life of our friend. That is all.
These are not the actions that Peter would have done in Volume 1, but it's clearly what he can do in Volume 3 because he has grown to understand himself separate from the Ravagers. Finally, on his own terms, he can come into his own through his ability to exist around others who don't want him to be anything but himself. But he still needs to learn that he can do that without them as well. It's worth noting that while Peter is more mature in many ways, he still is maturing and growing throughout Volume 3, and his character arc demonstrates this. All this is also why we see moments where it's clear that, despite his desire to return to a past relationship with Gamora that can never exist because she's a different person than the Gamora he knew, we see hints that Peter is more actually emotionally attached to Nebula, as she is to him. This isn't to say that they should be in a romantic relationship, but just to say the fact that they understand each other and have come to relate to each other means that they are actually more emotionally close than Peter is with this version of Gamora. Both Nebula and Peter suffered under the same types of father figures who tried to define and control them, and they've both been through immense traumas together that they can understand and fully see. And by the way, my gal Nebula has also, throughout the film, shown growth. This differs from the Nebula of the first and even second film, who only saw relationships insofar as how she could beat the other person in that connection. Nebula was constantly put into an antagonistic mindset by Thanos, even with her own sister. So Nebula constantly pushes people away because of the indoctrination of Thanos' system in her mind. She's also constantly told that her body wasn't enough, that she must be better, stronger, faster, augment herself, making Nebula's own body a source of trauma and pain because her father always saw it as wanting. This trying to define one's body and being put into an us versus them mindset is exactly why Nebula is my favorite Guardians character. I relate to her so hard as a trans person because both of us have had our bodies literally forced to be something that we didn't want them to be. While Nebula was forced to take augmentation, I was forced to go through a masculine puberty that I didn't want to go through. And both of us were placed into us versus them mindsets, me through masculinity in our society and Nebula through Thanos. Both Nebula and myself had our bodies and minds quite literally tried to be forced into a system that neither of us wished to fit into, and thus had to try to de-radicalize ourselves as a result. And it caused us a lot of pain and trauma to do so, but ultimately led to us being able to live our full and complete selves. This is why we stand Nebula here. Yet after her arc all the way through Avengers Endgame, Nebula has been able to see where she came from, and instead of working in competition with others now, has begun to work alongside them because people reached out and cared for her, including the Gamora who died in Infinity War. Because of people reaching out and trying to show her love and affection and caring outside of competition, Nebula was able to become a Guardian, part of a team, and ultimately in Volume 3 we see she's willing to put herself on the line for others without question, something she never would have done before. She even calls Rocket family at one point in the movie.
I'm family.
So is he.
Yet we still see some remnants of Thanos' system on Nebula in Volume 3. Because of her insecurity stemming from Thanos always viewing her as wanting, Nebula still feels a constant need to put herself above others too, as Mantis says.
I know you need to find fault in everyone else to make yourself feel okay.
She thinks she has to take it on all on her own, something that I can really relate to. Why do you think I try to do all my editing and writing and all these other things on my own? Because I don't trust others to do it as well as myself. It's something that I have had to work to get over the past few years, and why I love having collaborators like ARANOCK. Nebula still has an antagonistic mindset ingrained in her, and it causes her to push away characters like Drax and calling him stupid, as she thinks she has to take it all on as part of herself.
When are you gonna stop using the excuse of being some big dumb clown for contributing nothing and the rest of us having to carry your slack?
Don't push him!
Despite all of their conflict and flaws, the Guardians are a family, one they choose repeatedly. And at the beginning of the film, the heart of the family is attacked. When Adam Warlock hits the Guardians, it's at home when they are most vulnerable, and I think it's interesting that the supposed masculine ideal slams into Rocket right as he's looking at his body, which he clearly struggles with. The violence inflicted on him is interlinked with his difficult relationship to his body, a body that he doesn't have full control over because of the medical system of this society. Sound familiar? For people outside of the system, our bodies represent an affront to its existence. In the case of Nebula, she weaponizes her disability against systems. For both her and eventually Rocket, these altered parts of their bodies go from things they hate to something they incorporate into themselves in positive ways. They reclaim it.
I have a few upgrades courtesy of that gutted badger in the med bay, and we are not risking his life to make yours more convenient.
For Nebula, it becomes a tool by which she helps protect her family. She reclaims things which represented oppression in order to fight oppression.
That hurts.
What a pity.
Rocket's first word is hurt. His body existing causes him pain. So does Nebula's.
Until he knows some semblance of the profound and unceasing pain I know every single day.
As a chronically ill person, I too am in constant pain. And I have been since I was a little kid. I actually remember distinctly the first time I felt not pain while on really strong painkillers in high school after a severe injury. It's part of why I relate to Nebula. The complexities of the relationship with one's own body that these characters possess reflects my own experiences as a chronically ill, disabled trans woman.
Pick on someone your own size.
At the beginning of the film, the Guardians are all fighting in disconnected ways. They are all struggling with their own issues, and those issues come from systems and the trauma those systems caused.
Thus, through all of this, we can see that the Guardians, as they are depicted in Volume 3, are all products of systems who have found themselves through their relationships with other Guardians that exist outside of those systems. They have built their community, not wanting to live up to some ideal, but to exist for themselves and for those that they care about. As a result, throughout the 3 Guardians films, each of them has started to mature and grow into their own, being able to live outside of the systems that try to define them. This is symbolized by their living on Nowhere, a literal community built out of the head of a dead Eternal, which we learned in the movie Eternals are also quite literally space gods willing to genocide entire planets so that they can control others and keep the galaxy going as they see fit. The Guardians and Nowhere have repurposed this dead authoritarian god's skull to create their society, and also being incredibly fucking metal, breaking the rules of even gravity itself to build their community. The Eternal System, man. I'm gonna be honest, I am not metal enough to do this symbol. I'm just a nerd, alright? I'm trying my best, alright? I'm trying my best. But even with all of that growth, the Guardians are still imperfect, working out some of their insecurities stemming from their traumas living under systems that try to define who they are. Understanding that they have all changed and grown over the 3 movies, yet aren't entirely complete in their journeys, at least until this film.
I'm not trying to conquer the universe. I'm perfecting it.
And this brings us to the High Evolutionary. The High Evolutionary is a perfect villain for the final Guardians film. In many ways, he represents an amalgamation of all the systems the Guardians have fought their entire lives.
A celestial like a god?
Small G, son.
There is no God! That's why I stepped in!
For example, he only sees those he pretends to be a father figure for as functions for himself, like Ego or Yondu.
To ease his conscience, I said I'd never hurt them. And that was true. I mean, they never felt a thing.
I'm going to have to raise it all and start again.
And also has Thanos' authoritarian and parental cruelty.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
To take an imperfect clump of biological matter such as you and transform it into something perfect.
Yet even more so, the High Evolutionary is also a man who wants to press the universe into his fascistic ideal. And I don't say fascistic lightly. His goal is expressly fascistic within the film, with him attempting to use and manipulate eugenics research to create a supposed perfect being, a perfect society. He plans to build a machine that can force animals onto an evolutionary tract that he deems to be the perfect ideal life form, all in moments, believing that all other life forms, such as the animals that he's experimenting on, are lesser beings.
We have but a single quest. To create the perfect species and the perfect society.
The High Evolutionary's idea of evolution as a continual forward progress, perfectly directed and always leading to better results, is expressly eugenics and unsupported by any understanding of actual evolution. Linked in the description is an article by 3 separate scholars of biodiversity and biology covering why this is a myth.
How could you be part of a perfect species? You're simply a medley of mistakes we could learn from and apply to the creatures that truly mattered.
And this leads us to a discussion on fascism. Huzzah! Favorite thing to talk about. Much of the discourse in criticism surrounding Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was directed about the cruelty towards animals shown in the film, and how many thought that the movie deserved to have an R rating because of how horrifically the cruel torture by the High Evolutionary was on animals, with most people simply tossing up the depiction of said cruelty to James Gunn's tendency to be a provocateur with his content, something that he has had a long history of doing, with many people even saying that the visuals in Guardians were too much and should have been cut out.
James Gunn is a provocateur. That's what he has always been. It's kind of what got him in trouble and got him briefly fired off of this movie in the first place. But even going back to his other films, he is looking to provoke a strong reaction from an audience, and that's exactly what he does in this movie. In my opinion, he went too far. I think he tried to make things so tragic and so sad that it turned me off to a large section of the movie.
And certainly, I totally agree that those sensitive to this type of imagery or stories should be warned if this may trigger them before watching the film. But I'd also argue that this depiction of harm towards animals is incredibly intentional and important to what this movie is trying to say, as Gunn is using us as viewers and our empathy towards these animals to break down an ingrained bias in us as human beings that fascism takes advantage of. Anthropocentrism is the human belief that we, as humans, are separate and superior to nature, and that human life has intrinsic value above all other forms of life. And at the same time, under this belief, all other entities, like animals, are seen as resources that may be exploited for humanity because they are lesser beings. This belief builds upon an ingrained assumption of hierarchies, of which it places human beings on top. And many trace the roots of such hierarchical ideas within nature to things like the Christian version of the Old Testament, and specifically Genesis, with the Christian God instructing humans to subdue nature and control it, with even Adam himself deciding the name of animals in the Garden of Eden.
I'm gonna call you a horse.
We can see how this idea of naming is itself ingrained in the idea of who gets to control whom. But as a result, it creates the idea that there is a naturally ingrained human hierarchy based in nature itself.
John, the kind of control you're attempting is, it's not possible. Life finds a way.
One of the heroes at the end of the film even expresses this viewpoint, referring to the animals that Rocket Raccoon saves as lesser life forms. We even see a recontextualization of the first fight in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and the Abelisks, who are, in fact, as we learn in this movie, peaceful creatures who only fight when they are threatened while getting food.
They eat batteries, not people. Maybe they're just scared of what we are gonna do to them.
As a result, this scene in Volume 3 showcases that this view of hierarchy over nature is not just one of the villains, but has been made invisible as a natural way of viewing human relationships with nature, and one that places human beings at odds with nature, even when nature itself is not trying to be in competition. This ultimately leads to the idea of hierarchies expressing an us versus them mindset.
This gets to one of my few issues with the film. I didn't fully register it when I watched, other than a little dissonance, but Lady Night the Brave pointed it out to me. In a film so about why
everyone deserves a second chance,
and why all creatures deserve positive treatment, we spend a lot of time watching our heroes brutally murder creatures similar to Rocket. I mean, he's smushing these guys into roadkill. This is an element of Gunn's films I don't find as much issue with as other people do, where they will for a couple of scenes run on action video game logic in order to have extreme violence, regardless of the themes. To explain what I mean by action video game logic, we often in games will kill thousands of minions and then be given some sort of moral choice about whether to kill the big bad guy because they, usually a man, are the only people given real moral consideration.
Kill him. Why?
Because I'm a freaking guardian of the galaxy.
And that kind of happens here with the High Evolutionary. It's not an element I enjoy. But while this element was maybe ignorable in earlier films in the series, or actively supporting themes, here it begins directly contradicting the central messages. Even as it argues against hierarchical categorization of people and creatures, it treats violence against certain creatures as exempt from moral consideration. I really think this could have been fixed by just having them only fight people who are choosing to follow this fascism. They even fight guys like this in the sequence, and some of those guys do surrender.
Let him go, Flectic. It's our only chance.
But the Hellspawn are not given that consideration. As such, this element unfortunately undermines the overall message of collapsing hierarchies.
And many systems of power are built upon assumptions of hierarchies. According to social dominance theory pioneered by Jim Sinatus and Felicia Prado,
regardless of a society's form of government, human societies tend to organize as group-based social hierarchies, in which at least one group enjoys greater social status and power than other groups.
While this viewpoint is not inherently fascistic, that idea maps neatly onto fascistic ideals of attempting to legitimize and justify hierarchies through appeals to nature. Fascism often argues that nature itself imposes a hierarchy. According to How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley,
fascists argue that natural hierarchies of worth in fact exist, and that their existence undermines the obligation for equal consideration. Fascist ideology then takes advantage of a human tendency to organize society hierarchically, and a fascist politician represents the myths that legitimize their hierarchies as immutable facts. Their principal justification of hierarchy is nature itself. For the fascists, the principle of equality is a denial of natural law, which sets certain traditions, those of the most powerful, over others. The natural law, allegedly, places men over women, and members of the chosen nation of the fascists over other groupings.
And if you listen closely, many fascists will appeal to nature in their discussions and speeches, such as Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, did in his speech made in 1861.
Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea of equality. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. That slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition.
This idea of there being hierarchies and there being a natural superior race mirrors the High Evolutionary's viewpoint within Guardians Volume 3. The High Evolutionary believes that he can force an evolutionary path with his lesser races and breed them to a specific endpoint that he views as perfect. And this idea of a superior race that could be created through eugenics and breeding was one that gained full force in Nazi Germany. One misnomer that many people think about the Nazis and Hitler is that Hitler thought Germans were automatically themselves the superior race. What Hitler and the Nazis actually believed and attempted to peddle with their racist pseudoscience was that certain traits were inherently better in humans, ones that were centralized in an Aryan bloodline, a bloodline that had been diluted by Aryans breeding with lesser races like Jewish folks or black people. And so the horrors of the Holocaust were the Nazis attempting to kill lesser races so that the German people could breed with each other to create an Übermensch and the perfect Third Reich society. This is also why German folks attempted to try to reclaim Aryan, homosexual, and trans people in Nazi Germany, sending many to conversion therapy in order to try to save their bloodline and make them good workers for the state. And we see this utopian eugenicist ideal expressed by the High Evolutionary to Rocket, how the High Evolutionary dreamed of a utopia, but one that was defined by his ideas of eugenic perfection.
Your designer heart still beats with common blood. And what if you could have genetic perfection?
Yet all of this is based on a false eugenicist idea that there is a natural superior endpoint to evolution, rather than what evolution actually is. Life reacting and growing to live within the environment that it finds itself in, growing into itself alongside its environment and those around it, not in competition with nature, as Charles Darwin suggested with his idea of survival of the fittest.
The phrase survival of the fittest paints a mental image of what Princeton biological anthropologist Alan Mann characterizes as the tooth and claw of bloody nature, as though every organism in a particular area is perpetually fighting for the ability to survive. In this context, fitness can be misinterpreted as an ideal evolutionary goal, but evolution acts to produce function, not perfection, says Mann.
This leads us to how the High Evolutionary treats those around him. The High Evolutionary views Rocket not as a full, unique person, despite the fact that he's a living being, but sees Rocket as a number and a function. He is a tool to create his perfect race. And the High Evolutionary sees Rocket as less than, based simply on his own determination of what is superior. Yet Rocket is smarter than the High Evolutionary. He showcases this quite clearly several times throughout the film.
It was too little filtration.
In the hypotonic, yes, we know, we fixed that, but how did you know?
And yet the High Evolutionary still sees Rocket as a lesser being, showcasing that the High Evolutionary isn't really basing his idea of the superior race on something external, but his own aggrandizement and ego.
To seek out other life.
It was all so disappointing.
Believing things need to mirror him and look like him in order to be able to be considered superior. It reflects the same thing that the Nazis were doing. Oh, what a coincidence that the superior race that they thought humans could be bred into just happened to be the race that the Nazis were from. This isn't to say that Rocket's intelligence is what makes him just as worthy of life as the High Evolutionary, but that the High Evolutionary, on his own terms, should value intelligence if that's what he thought was the superior trait, and yet he specifically does not in Rocket's case, showcasing his hypocrisy, all centering on his eugenicist idea that reflects his own ego. In the end though, the High Evolutionary cannot understand how Rocket was able to outsmart him, to make his machine work better than even he could. It's because, to the High Evolutionary, Rocket cannot possess any superior traits. Yet Rocket has evolved not through testing, not because he is inherently or naturally smarter, but because he is in connection with others. What creativity is not just intelligence, but the ability for one to bounce off new ideas through interaction with other ideas. Creativity is often one idea and another idea hitting each other and then creating a third greater idea that then someone takes and goes further with. Which is why fascistic ideology is inherently destructive, because the fascist's goal is to just create people around them who are just like them.
Me too.
They ultimately are less creative, less thoughtful, less artistic, less able to create something new, because they are just trying to recreate themselves. Thus, the reason that Rocket is able to create something that the High Evolutionary could never think of was because he had a found family with fellow lab animals. And through them, he was able to create and generate new ideas because he was exposing himself to new points of view, new people, new ideas, and new emotions that the High Evolutionary could never even think of. Rocket, through his connections, was able to grow and think beyond the limits of the High Evolutionary's imagination. And we see this quite clearly where Rocket and the other lab animals choose their own names.
And me and my friends are gonna go flying together into the forever and beautiful sky. Lila and Teefs and Flora and me, Rocket.
They escape the High Evolutionary's functions by defining themselves despite their torture by him. All of this reads to me as very queer and trans. This is not to say that Rocket Raccoon is an explicitly trans or queer character, yet it showcases why trans and queer narratives often resonate in stories made within and about fighting back against systems, and even specifically in our current day society, fascistic worldviews. Queer people find found family, and trans people define and name ourselves. Yet we only have to find our families and define ourselves because our community forces us to try to fit a role that we do not actually fit from birth. I am only transgender because I live in a society that would tell me I had to be a man in the first place. I am only seen as queer, as strange as that word implies, because society views me as queer. If our society didn't tell us you had to be this way from the beginning, I wouldn't actually be trans or queer. Many LGBTQ people have to find a family that sees us for who we are because our society today would not let our biological family see us for ourselves, but instead as who we are supposed to be to serve capitalism or a fascistic state. And I say capitalism because Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 explicitly calls out capitalism and its connections to fascism. After all, we visit the company OrgCorp. Here at OrgCorp,
they're corporate shells,
led by the amazing Nathan Fillion, who is constantly shown to be a belittling competitive man.
Everything he does drives me crazy. I swear I'm gonna throttle him. I'm gonna go to jail for murder.
This showcases how corporate mindsets continually set people against each other, just like Thanos did to Nebula and Gamora. And we even see how this capitalist mindset functions to serve fascism through the anxiety of work and competition in Adam Warlock, who at one point in the movie kills another worker for the High Evolutionary.
What the hell? We're working for the same boss.
Yes, But I need the credit, chum.
Because Warlock has anxiety about not being able to survive, an anxiety that is itself stoked in him by the High Evolutionary. Again, we showcase how fascism itself is ultimately self-destructive. And we also learn that the High Evolutionary is the Org Corp's CEO, which he then uses to fund his fascistic goals. Again, showcasing how capitalism and fascism are tied together. I don't know what I'm doing. I thought I was going to be able to put my hands together, but I tried to do something weird. Didn't happen. Didn't work. Anyways, we're moving on.
When discussing Volume 2, I said I would come back to discussing the Sovereigns, while Volume 3 directly confirms that the Sovereigns were another manifestation of ego.
But your egos have run wild.
We see this most strongly in the Sovereign Leader's most precious child.
Adam.
My poor baby.
It hurts. Speaking of Adam Warlock, though, many people complain that he was a superfluous character to this story in Guardians Volume 3, often citing his tie to the Infinity Stones as the reason he's not an important character anymore in the MCU, given that the MCU has moved past the Infinity Stones as a concept.
Infinity Stones?
We actually got a lot of those. Yeah, some of the guys use them as paperweights.
People also argue that he just didn't really fit into the story proper. But for me, I kind of see those arguments as a very utilitarian, unnuanced way of viewing the story presented. That everything that doesn't fit this exact story that's being told is superfluous. But I argue that Warlock is a necessary part of understanding how fascism works within this story's critique, because he is what all of our characters, the Guardians, would and could have become had they instead decided to fulfill the role that they were forced into for a system.
You can change. He won't let me.
He is built to reflect the High Evolutionary's idea of perfection, much like the Nazis' Übermensch. He's literally a blonde-haired, literal golden boy. Yet despite all this, we also learn that Adam was a product pushed out by the High Evolutionary too early, and that he's emotionally stunted.
You removed Adam from his cocoon early, my leash. He is still a child.
This speaks to how capitalism often likes to cut corners to try to get things done as cheaply as possible. But it also leads to Warlock feeling like he's not enough, feeling wanting, just like Nebula was. And in also many ways, he's like Star-Lord in Volume 1, a man-child unable to come to terms with the harm that he causes. But unlike Quill, he just does his job harming others throughout the film. As a result, Warlock presents a necessary counterpoint to our heroes and the themes that this movie is presenting, as well as showcasing where they have grown from. Yet it's even more pointed than that Warlock is the character used to showcase all of this. In the comic books, Adam Warlock was also tied to being perfect by an evil group of eugenic scientists called the Enclave. But then, after escaping the Enclave, goes on to be viewed as a messiah figure within the Marvel Comics universe. He even learns at one point in the comics that in the future he becomes the evil self-named Magnus, a leader of an evil intergalactic church who uses his messiah complex to control others. Thus, using Adam as a character in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in the place that he's used in hints at how fascist societies can continually recreate new authoritarians, even if the old ones are defeated.
The film also connects fascism with Christian imagery, reflecting how Christian religions often get used by fascists, particularly in American contexts.
It is a war, and there will be casualties, and we must be soldiers.
The far right, making appeals to nature, is built on an appeal to God. In their eyes, the world and the people on it were made by God, and God made these hierarchies, so therefore they should be upheld and protected. This is a particularly common element amongst anti-trans individuals.
Christ is king! Christ is king!
God made man and woman to be this specific way, and any deviation is an affront to God, nature. Returning to what was discussed earlier with naturalism and hierarchies, a lot of this approach to the world is built on a Christian conceptualization of their religious texts.
Those who've been coming to church and taking communion, they have nothing to fear tonight. As for the rest of them, let God sort them out.
And Gunn makes this connection explicitly clear. Gunn still uses Christ imagery for Warlock throughout Volume 3. Many of the ways that Warlock is shot and framed are reference points to Jesus and God. Warlock at one point is stabbed much like Jesus was on the cross, and he, in a way, dies and returns to later save people. As well as two shots reflect La Pieta and the creation of man, with Warlock being placed in the divine position. All of this also directly refutes things like Zack Snyder's usage of Superman as a Christ figure within his DCU movies. Not only is Gunn's framing of Warlock as Christ more subtle than Snyder's more on-the-nose imagery, Snyder never actually really evolved the idea of Superman as Christ throughout his films. But in Snyder's Batman v Superman movies, Snyder, intentionally or not, constantly reinforces the idea that Superman is worthy of being a savior because he is genetically superior to humans. He is stronger, better, faster, and thus deserving of being on top. Hierarchical thinking that dovetails with fascism. And to be clear, this is not me calling Snyder a fascist, but his art does lean into aesthetics through his adoration of shallow symbology, which thus can be easily co-opted for fascism, which is all about simple aesthetics of power. I personally don't think that Snyder thinks that deeply about any of his imagery. He just goes with what looks cool, which again is what leads to fascism being able to co-opt it, because they can inject any reading that they want into when something doesn't have deeper meaning, citing power and hierarchies as the things that they often relate to.
Not to mention that Superman is in many ways a Jewish analog character made by Jewish writers. There's an excellent video called The Golem and the Jewish Superhero by Jacob Geller, which you should watch for more on this topic. Thus, Snyder was taking a Jewish symbol and applying Christianity over top of it, much like the villains of the Guardians of the Galaxy films wish to do to the universe, to place their worldviews and their idea of perfection over top of other cultures, erasing them. On top of this, while we were making this video, James Gunn cast David Cornsweet, a Jewish actor, to play Superman. In the sources document, there'll be a link to Jay Michelson's article for Rolling Stone explaining why that matters. Touching back on the MCU, as many Jewish people have talked about, Captain America is a golem created by Jewish writers, and in text, being a superhero created by a Jewish doctor to protect Jewish people during World War II. The MCU plasters over this, as is done with a lot of Jewish characters from the comics.
Warlock, though, in Volume 3 being tied to a Christ figure, goes back to showcase how Catholicism in these discussions is often used to justify hierarchical thinking, going all the way back to anthropocentrism that we discussed earlier. You'll often see Christianity in the United States used to justify anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-Semitic, and much more rhetoric, as well as attempt to control the bodies of women and other minorities. All this in service of the religious system, saying God wanted you this way. Again, a call to naturalism. Well, here in Volume 3, the artifice of that rhetoric is revealed. Warlock is depicted as Christ, as a savior figure, but he was made by a man willing to use him to support fascist ends. The High Evolutionary even says,
"There is no God! That's why I stepped in!"
But moving on though, what I love Gunn's work for is he showcases that even Adam, the symbol of all of this, can escape this system through empathy. Warlock is able to first feel empathy for having killed a man, but is only able to feel that empathy through how that affects that man's animal companion.
He looks sad. I really don't enjoy how that's making me feel, actually.
By connecting with this animal companion and thereby his competition, Adam starts to be able to find the ability to empathize with other beings. But he's able to do so through the emotion of something that the High Evolutionary would view as lesser. Further, acts of empathy towards Warlock, both by Gamora and later Groot, show Warlock that there is a better way. He finds connection with others, and at the end he even saves Peter's life in the film's climax in a shot that places Adam in the creation of man pose, recontextualizing him as someone who can save others rather than destroy once he escapes the High Evolutionary's control. And by the way, the critique of America in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does not end with Adam Warlock. Oh god, does it not? Because we eventually visit what the High Evolutionary's perfect utopian world is, and it's called Counter-Earth. And the reason that it's called Counter-Earth is that we learn that the High Evolutionary went to Earth, like our Earth today, and looked around and said, "I liked what you're doing here," and used Earth as his basis for his fascist society. And not just all of Earth. No, he specifically uses the template of red-lined 1950s American suburbia as his template for his fascist utopia.
By trying to go back to a specific time period, one frequently touted by American conservatives and fascists as ideal, he ends up recreating all of the issues inherent to the systems of that era. Conservatism is thus always a self-destructive ideology.
Jesus' suffering, it isn't simply necessary, it is good.
By trying to conserve society at a specific point as a solution to the failures of systems, they inevitably maintain or even worsen those exact failures they meant to fix. Their ideology is built on creating and recreating harm.
Imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
And Redlined America itself was an attempt by America to try to ingrain and make seem natural and normal the segregation of black people and push them out of American life and access to capital, aka power within a capitalist system.
From the first segregated public housing projects of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal to the 1949 Housing Act that encouraged white movement to the suburbs, to unconstitutional racial zoning ordinances enacted by city governments, the current state of the American city is a direct result of unconstitutional, state-sanctioned racial discrimination. The truth is that segregation in every metropolitan area was imposed by racially explicit federal, state, and local policy, without which private actions of prejudice or discrimination would not have been very effective. And if we understand that our segregation is a governmentally sponsored system, which of course we had called de jure segregation, only then can we begin to remedy it. Because if it happened by individual choice, it's hard to imagine how to remedy it. If it happened by government action, then we should be able to develop equally effective government actions to reverse it.
The High Evolutionary looked at how racial hierarchy and enforcement was done in the US suburban neighborhoods in the 1940s and 50s and tied this to his fascistic ideal of the perfect functional state that he wished to make. And this, by the way, is exactly what the Nazis did. In the 1930s, a Nazi lawyer named Heinrich Krieger came to the US and liked what he saw the US doing regarding its race relationships, so much so that he felt that he should use it to support the Nazis' fascist goals in Germany.
There is a transcript of a June 5, 1934 conference of leading German lawyers gathered to exchange ideas about how to best operationalize a racist regime. The record reflects how the most extreme among them, who relied on Krieger's synoptic scholarship, were especially drawn to American legal codes based on white supremacy. The main conceptual idea was Friesler's. Race, he argued, is a political construction. In both America and Germany, the importance and meaning of race for the most part had been determined less by scientific realities or social conventions than by political decisions enshrined in law.
However, this tie to the racist history of America does lead me to one of my major critiques of Volume 3. This is because while Chadwick Iwuji is fantastic as the High Evolutionary, and I adore his acting, and the character does mention
Earth would be a fabulous place were it not for the ignorance and bigotry.
In regards to the United States, it still reads as somewhat uncomfortable to have cast a black man in the role of a fascist who explicitly wishes to recreate American racial hierarchical systems and who does eugenics to try and create his ideal society. Now, obviously, I am very white, despite what you see with the blue skin here, so I will say I highly recommend Princess Weeks' video on racially sensitive casting for more discussions on this topic. And I will, again, be very clear that this is no knock at the actor, and it's undoubtedly understandable that James Gunn would want to give an actor that he enjoyed working with during his time on Peacemaker a role in Volume 3.
This man, Leota, he's a murderer. But still I know his thoughts. Even he could have changed.
But I think that this is a discussion worth having and analyzing. This isn't me condemning the film, because quite literally I adore the film, but something that I would offer up to all of you watching this to go and have further discussions on. Again, pointing you to the Princess Weeks video. But moving on, while this is the most direct tie to how American legal frameworks connects to discussions of hierarchical systems often centered around race in the film, it is not the only one. A subtler one is how the whole reason that the Guardians need to go after the High Evolutionary in the first place is because the High Evolutionary put inside Rocket an inability for him to be given medical care.
Mickey! It's Rocket. They put
a kill switch
in him.
What? Rocket's healthcare is quite literally taken away from him. The Guardians have to break into a healthcare company in order to save him. It's an indictment, subtly, of how the American healthcare system too continually denies coverage to those who are less able to afford it, and goes to show how we should go and try to break in and destroy the medical insurance system. Just saying. I mean, quite literally, many trans people cannot get access to hormones or surgeries that are required for our mental health, because we are often denied that by the American healthcare system. But this brings us all back to something I started off this conversation with, the discussion of animal cruelty. Gunn's depiction of animal cruelty is supposed to confront us with the intrinsic harm that fascists, like the High Evolutionary, enact on those who they view as lesser, but also engages us as viewers with how we can fall into that trap of viewing animals as lesser beings, but how it's our empathy that can lead us through that. Depicting animal cruelty within the film is necessary for making us, as viewers, emotionally feel and break down our assumptions of lesser or more deserving beings. By having us empathize with the pain that the animals go through throughout the film, Gunn guides us and shows us how we break down fascistic thinking, letting emotion and connection guide us to view all life as equally worthy. Gunn does this with animals, but it's also a symbolic breaking down of how much of society bases itself on assumptions of implicit hierarchies, often calling to nature as a justification for such hierarchies. By seeing every life as a full person, by caring about them and letting them be their full selves and not trying to press them into a system that thinks in forms of hierarchies, guided there by emotion, that is how you fight back against fascism. And it is worth noting that we see all of our main characters go through hell for each other throughout the film. They all get hurt, and empathy is what saves them. For example, look at Adam and Peter at the end of the film. But Guardians 3 is about these characters not going out to fight a system, to fight fascism, but is about saving a friend when a golden fascist boy comes crashing into the town and tries to rip him away from them. It's a film about a quest for caring and emotion. Adam Warlock comes for Rocket to try to take him away and deperson him and thrust him into the same system of the High Evolutionary that wanted to use him and traumatize him and toss him aside. That by the very nature of trying to support and care for their friend, it inherently clashes with fascism. We need to destroy fascism, but we do it for other people, for connection, not because we wish to be in competition. Destroying fascism is but a step in what the real goal is, caring for others. And through this journey of caring for Rocket, the Guardians do bring down fascism, but also they finally come to terms with their own insecurities and how they don't have to exist for a system, but exist for each other, by caring for each other.
I love you guys.
Drax learns that he can reframe himself as a father figure. Mantis learns that she can empathize with others rather than through others by talking to the obelisks. Peter learns that he can be a leader without Gamora. He doesn't need her to define himself, allowing this Gamora to finally feel like a part of a family rather than someone being used for how she relates to Peter or for her own abilities. Nebula comes to learn that she can trust others to get things done and not see herself as needing to do all of the work. Yet, it's Rocket, in the end, who we learn has always been the center of the story. Through his friends, Rocket survives and ultimately beats the High Evolutionary, and he tells him the truth.
You didn't want to make things perfect. You just hated things the way they are.
Rocket can see the High Evolutionary's mistakes because he is able to have connection with others. The High Evolutionary never wanted perfection. What he actually wanted, what is at the root of most of fascism, is a fear of the world. A fascist is never satisfied because fascism fuels itself on endless hate, anxiety, and destruction. It always needs an in-group and an out-group to make hierarchies of power. It always has to make someone feel wanting. But that's because the fascists themselves feel wanting. They feel like not enough because they aren't, because they refuse connection. They hate others and despise others and continually commit trauma after trauma, genocide after genocide, because they are ineffectual and they feel that anxiety. The High Evolutionary destroys his own society because he believes it's not perfect enough, because he just can't accept that perfection is not possible.
The thing about perfection is that it's unknowable. It's impossible, but it's also right in front of us all the time.
Because there is no such thing as perfection. There is only a beautiful, endless, imperfect self. A self that only grows through connection with something new, with others. The worlds that the High Evolutionary builds are still imperfect. People are still fearful and bigoted towards each other. They hurt each other, yes, but what the Guardians showcase is that there is also still kindness and empathy. The Guardians also showcase, when they come to his planet, how they corrupt his systems by being outsiders and weirdos. Even Drax doesn't even know how to sit on a couch the way you're supposed to.
Drax, sit up!
That's what it's here for.
Drax, it isn't. It's made for people to sit shoulder to shoulder right next to each other. Get your boots off for pillows.
I find it hard to believe it doesn't have multiple purposes.
I'm sorry.
This understanding is a very queer relationship to physical objects in the world made by society.
To queer use is to make use audible, to listen to use, to bring to the front what ordinarily recedes into the background. Queer use is when you use something for a purpose that is very different from that which is originally intended. An opening created for convenience can have a queer potential. It can mean lessening control of what or who can pass through. When things are used by those for whom they were not intended, the effect can be queer. queer use, when we aim to shatter what has provided a container.
In a way, the Guardians themselves become this queer usage. They break the containers they were put into, and Drax sitting on the couch represents this. It's a silly, dumb scene, and yet it means so much subtly. He sits in it how he wishes to use it, different from how it was intended. Fascism focuses on usefulness and how people can function for the great machine, the great whole. The Nazis often said,
"This is Corey Lewandowski. You know me as President Trump's 2016 campaign manager and his current 2020 senior advisor. And only work sets you free."
Outside their concentration camps of death, work and death for them are ultimately synonymous. Labor was all for the state. And whether you were the Nazi Aryan ideal subsuming yourself into the whole, or you were seen as a subhuman racialized Jew, Sinti, Romani, queer, disabled, or mentally ill person, you were worked to death for the machine. Thus, queerness, queer use, using something outside of what it's intended for, both in objects like the couch, but in our lives living for ourselves, not a machine, is directly anti-fascist. Fascism focuses on use, how you as a worker can be useful for the state, the machine, right down to how you live your life. Queerness, not just in terms of sexuality, is about using your life outside what it was intended for by the system. Queer use is to use something for ourselves. Queerness is anti-fascist. The Guardians corrupt the high evolutionary system by just being themselves, by being queer people in his world, being people who live for themselves and exist in his world despite his rules. And no one feels this more than Rocket himself. Yet most importantly, it wasn't his desire to kill the evolutionary that fueled him. It was not a desire for revenge.
Past Gamora acts as an important demonstration of how drastically different the Guardians are at this point in life compared to Volume 1, particularly during the Orgocorp section. It's an interesting way of returning a character without undercutting the loss that is felt or feeling cheap. When she says,
"I'm family."
So is he.
It demonstrates that the Guardians have become a really tight-knit family over time.
We have to stop Ronan.
How?
But the most obvious way this contrast is used to show the character's change is Gamora at the ending being the voice of,
"If we want to live, we have to leave now."
And Rocket saying,
"I'm done running."
If we're being honest about the structure of this trilogy, it's about Peter letting go of his ego and the position of protagonist, and eventually returning to the places and emotions he has run from for the longest time. He goes from being Star-Lord to the guy that mows his grandpa's lawn. It's also about Rocket ceasing to run away from his past and trauma and taking back a sense of self-identity and ego to overcome the false ego that he has performed, the projection of confidence he fakes because he is so deeply insecure, in order to gain true confidence. So I would argue that it's a trilogy about both of them, that they're the deuterogonists, that it's a story about all of the Guardians, but particularly Rocket and Peter. Rocket in the first film is someone who would seek vengeance, but now we see him taking on the leadership role Peter held in the first film, and he uses it to save everyone, and doing violence only because the oppressors have made it necessary.
This is a nuance that most filmmakers, especially filmmakers who sit at a perspective of power in a hierarchy in our society today, like James Gunn himself does, often miss. Many assume that those who suffer trauma from systems just seek revenge against said system. We can see this very clearly in stories written from those perspectives, that those harmed will form new lines of hierarchies and thus attempt to just replace one fascist system with another. For example, robot revolutions in film like the ones showcased in the Terminator movies are not about AI taking over. What those movies are subtextually about are the filmmakers often expressing anxiety that those viewed as lesser will want to take over and dominate them in return. This is an anxiety that often many cisgender straight white dudes have when they write stories, because they have an anxiety and fear, whether conscious or not, that because they hold a dominant place in society today, everyone else around them wishes to do the same to them, to place them as lesser than. That everyone thinks the same way as they do in these hierarchical terms. And it's because many of them have benefited or been indoctrinated from lines of privilege that they grew up in that have been made invisible to them in our society. They just wish to fit into a community because it is made comfortable for them. The things are built for them to use comfortably, for the most part. So many stories like Terminator stories, or recently even in Star Trek Picard Season 3, which I spoke about in this video when it came to that series' villains, are often showcasing an underclass rebelling and doing so out of trauma and wishing to take over themselves. Yet James Gunn understands what really drives those who suffer from systems like this: empathy. Because Rocket didn't want to defeat the High Evolutionary, what he wanted first and foremost was to save his fellow raccoons and other animals. His defeat of the High Evolutionary was only incidental. He was trying to save his fellow life forms. Not lesser life forms, but fellow life forms. And in doing so, he found out that he is indeed a raccoon, something he has denied his whole life, because he was cut off from that history. Like how Quill was cut off from his Earth culture, Rocket is cut from his past, and by finally having this moment of empathy, he finds himself. He finds who he is, who he was, and ultimately, who he will become, the actual leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. For one moment, all three versions of Rocket are in glorious cohesion in Rocket's soul. That is what beats fascism. Finding yourself for yourself, across time and identity.
Which connects heavily with what I discussed in my film Queer Relativity about identity across time and the queerness of that.
That's not sky, that's a ceiling.
Someday, I'm gonna make great machines that fly. And me and my friends are gonna go flying together into the forever and beautiful sky.
Rocket's chosen name, as we learn here, is actually a symbol of freedom, of a desire for those he loves to fly in the great beyond, free of the cages of their oppressive creator. What could be more trans than that? Much later, when his friend is shot, her last word is
sky.
Solidifying this meaning so deeply, when he sees Lila again, they are in an open, sunny place.
I got you killed. I got everybody killed.
We were right. The sky is beautiful, and it is forever.
Rocket's entire life has, until this point, been cages and boxes and having to break free of them.
They made us for nothing. The stupid experiments to be thrown away.
There are the hands that made us, and then there are the hands that guide the hands.
I think these lines represent how the love and care of others help to shape and form us, how we make ourselves through our connections with others.
How dare you think you are more? 8, 9, P, 1, 3!
The name's Rocket. Raccoon.
Also, if your hero moment is a character declaring a true name in defiance of a fascist saying their dead name, then the character is definitionally trans. Just look at The Matrix.
Goodbye, Mr. Anderson. My name is Neo.
The family we see in Volume 3, and especially by the end of the film, have grown through creating a community of vulnerability, a space in which everyone can show pain and love and happiness and care. Earlier in the film, there's a parallel shot between Peter Quill arriving on the planet and offering a cloth to a woman in pain, and the offering of a cloth to Rocket by Lila much earlier in the film. It's small kindnesses between very different beings. It shows what type of family the Guardians have grown into, but it also demonstrates how, even if you've been through hell, even if everything in the universe has tried to beat love out of you, you can re-find that almost innocent kindness and care. That it's through connection and empathy and love that we can save ourselves and each other. The hug between all of them when Rocket wakes up, the way Nebula cries hearing Rocket's voice. Listen, I'm just a sucker for found family stories, especially one which shows such a deep respect and care and love for that type of connection. After they succeed in saving everyone, they all embrace. Even Adam has learned to care about others and show that vulnerability. We end the film where it started, but truly changed. A hopeful, beautiful song by one of my favorite artists playing. A very queer song in its own right, as a lot of Florence's work is. A new society forming. One which would be a space that all the Guardians never had. A safe place to grow up. A home out of nowhere.
And this is what all the Guardians do. They find themselves. And it was through their rejection of the systems that bound them, and with a family that let them see themselves through love. I adore how much Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just has characters express throughout it how much they love each other, because they understand each other fully now. Even Kraglin finally sees Cosmo as the good dog she is. Yes, she is! Okay, he's not the worst character anymore. In the movie's final moments, we hear Groot say something other than "I am Groot."
I love you guys.
But we hear these words not because he said anything different. He's still saying "I am Groot." But we hear these words because not only can the characters understand him because they know him truly, but because we as the audience now fully understand and see these characters. And maybe understand ourselves.
A history of use is a history of things becoming natural. The normative ordinary is a violence, suggesting a natural order in lieu of a most unnatural system of control. The glitch is something that extends beyond the most literal technical mechanicals. It helps us celebrate failure as a generative force.
Rocket grabbed the pieces and reassembled them. I think Yondu would want you to have it.
Yondu's arrow, broken and then reforged, is a beautiful metaphor for what this family does for each other. I think in a way the Guardians films are about how it's easy to break something and it's hard to fix it. It's especially true with people. And maybe it isn't the same as it was before, but isn't there a beauty in the seams?
So that's it? The group's over?
No. Well, the galaxy still needs its guardians.
As I said goodbye to this lovable group of outsiders at the end of Volume 3, I realized that each of them had come into their own in ways that no other characters have in the MCU. And that stems so much from what James Gunn, as a filmmaker, has brought of himself to his work. I made a video about Gunn about a year ago that you should all watch if you liked this video, and it was talking about this exact fact. About Gunn's history with his own need to find himself in a system that told him to be something else. How he was a toxic man using edgy humor that pushed others away from him, and how it caused even his own marriage to dissolve as a result. How he wrestled with alcohol and depression throughout his life. How after all of that, he managed to find empathy for himself. And he grew because he accepted accountability for his actions, and that set him on a journey of moving forward.
I feel like I've kind of danced around telling the truest story I can for many years of my life. I've been a little distracted by trying to be shocking or edgy or cool or whatever. And by letting go of that and telling the truest story I can, even if it's about aliens and talking raccoons, it works.
He also spoke about how the Guardians movies themselves were about that very journey.
I feel like Guardians forced me into a much deeper way of thinking about, my relationship to people, I suppose. I was a very nasty guy on Twitter. It was a lot of fucking edgy, in-your-face, dirty stuff. I suddenly was working for Marvel and Disney, and that didn't seem like something I could do anymore. I thought that would be a big hindrance in my life, but the truth was it was a big, huge opening for me. I realized a lot of that stuff is a way that I push away people. When I was forced into being this, I felt more fully myself.
And how Gunn saw himself most in the character of Rocket Raccoon.
It's pretty clear that Rocket still feels alone. That's why I end on Rocket's face, is that I think that he's learned to be more of a family member to everyone.
Gunn worked through many of his issues with masculinity like Rocket throughout these films, but he did so through his work by forming a family on the set of the Guardians films themselves. If you look at any of the behind-the-scenes images from the movies, you can see how much the Guardians cast and crew care for each other. And you can see how that caused Gunn himself to grow as a filmmaker over these movies. You can also see his ability to empathize with others grow as well. Guardians was full of sexist jokes directed at women.
And this green whore, she...
Oh, you must stop!
Yet, in Volume 3, that humor that plays into hierarchical thinking has mostly gone away. The one joke in the film that could have easily played with hierarchical assumptions and masculine bravado occurs when Mantis manipulates one of the corporate chills to be in love with Drax.
You're hopelessly in love with him.
Oh no.
And this moment could have easily played into simple homophobia to get its laugh, with Drax being angry or upset at being hit on by a man. Yet Batista, bringing his exceptional talent of being vulnerable, plays it more adorably and sweetly.
How you doing today? I'm all right. What was your name again? Drax the Destroyer.
As if he's embarrassed in a way that reveals more about Drax than it is about pushing away homosexual emotions. Even further, as mentioned before, Gunn used to simply be an edgy provocateur, just simply trying to do terrible jokes in order to get a strong reaction, any reaction from his audience, without intention. An edgy irony that ultimately means nothing and forces you to deconnect with people. Here, however, in Volume 3, Gunn showcases animal cruelty, though, not to simply elicit any response without purpose that ultimately just fosters anger and reinforces hierarchical assumptions implicit in said jokes, but uses the strong reaction to build empathy rather than antagonism. All of this showcases Gunn's growing ability as a filmmaker and artist to empathize both inwards and outwards in a way he was not able to do before, all through the family he found through making his art. Even more so, Gunn recognizes that art is a team effort, not one that is about him as a hierarchical leader, but one that requires creative effort and love from everyone involved, and thus making the art itself stronger.
Is James Gunn an auteur?
Oh my God.
I don't know. The auteur,
it's a weird question. I mean, because I don't know what that means exactly. There's so much baggage to it. I mean, auteur theory means that the director is the author of the film. And I am definitely the biggest voice in a film. I make all of the choices, I draw all the frames, but no matter what, there are a lot of people that work on a movie. A production designer, a costume designer, a DP, they all affect the movie, not to mention some actors, you know.
You need to let people know that. I think that my cast knows how much I appreciate what they do.
And the crew.
The crew, hugely. Like, you know, a lot of directors, you just never hear the crew come out of their mouths when they're doing interviews.
Yeah.
But, you know, I talk about Beth Mickle, who's my production designer, all the time. I talk about Judiana Makovsky, who does my costume designs.
Oh, awesome.
Those, by the way, I hired a new editor yesterday. He came in and I said, you got to get used to, we do a different thing. You know, the departments all work together. Like, I have a crew of people around me now who've been around me for a long time. Anyway,
no, but you mentioned
those people aren't brought up a lot.
Right.
And you don't understand, like, everybody's actors. And the actors are incredibly important. They create a lot. But man, you know, if you talk about an actor versus what Beth Mickle did, who created all the sets, like, really the biggest voice is Beth's.
Yeah.
She's, you know, in terms of what Guardians 3 is. I love all you guys, and I really appreciate everything you've given to this movie. And honest to God, I really, truly appreciate all of you. It's been a fabulous adventure for me, and I've never felt so supported in my life. So thank you all.
Gunn downplays the idea of a great man, a great leader, a great artist, and instead discusses how while his ideas are what directs the movie's intention, it's not his creativity or skill or ideas alone that make the final product. It's a family working together to make something greater than they could ever make apart. That family allows Gunn to be empathetic and be received empathetically. Yet that family that Gunn formed, like Rocket, was torn away from him in a moment by a system. In 2018, Mike Chernovich, a far-right troll, led a successful smear campaign against Gunn, surfacing Gunn's horrific tweets from his time before joining the Guardians films. This led Gunn to be temporarily fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which he had been set to direct. Chernovich and the alt-right groups that attacked Gunn wished to essentialize him as one thing, saying that he would always be this toxic, edgy dude, his worst self, the product of a system, not the man who had grown since then. Just like the High Evolutionary only saw Rocket as someone who had not grown, who could just be used for the system, his worst, most diminished self. And so too did the internet try to essentialize Gunn. And yet, like Rocket, Gunn was saved by his family.
Here I was at the lowest of the low when it looked as if my career was completely over, and these people who had been by my side as workmates came to my defense in a way that you do not see happening when other people are canceled.
Gunn's found family got him his job back so he could tell his story. Because it is his story. Rocket Raccoon is James Gunn, and the story of all of the Guardians films was always his. At the end of the story, it's time to move on. In the final moments of Volume 3, all of the Guardians begin to realize that they need to seek more of their selves, who they are becoming next. Rocket had learned who he was by connecting with his lost past taken from him, but Quill hadn't done that yet. He needed to return home to Earth to communicate with his past. Mantis herself needed to leave this family so that she could find herself separate from those who she always was trying to give herself to. And Nebula needed to stay and take care of kids to be able to trust others, and Drax needed to be a parent. All of them had new journeys to go on, but they always have their family, because their family, no matter where they go, will always see them, the real them. Similarly, James Gunn is off on a new adventure. He is done with Marvel and the Guardians films. He is now making DC movies. New stories to tell, new identities to discover.
At the beginning we said Guardians is the story of Rocket, what his journey is. It's learning that you're worthy of being loved, always have been. If I'm being honest, finding this for myself was difficult. and took the help of a lot of really wonderful people. Jessie strongly included. Didn't tell her about this before recording, but hey Jessie, I love you. Thank you so much for being incredible, and thank you so much for reminding me that I have worth. You know how difficult I find that. Oh, I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna mess up my makeup. I'm not messing up my makeup, chat. Depending on when people met me, they would come to the conclusion that I was either a self-centered, egotistical jackass or someone who was deeply self-loathing and struggled to perform confidence. No in-betweens, at least when I was younger. I think now I have a natural confidence to me, but I did not then. And I also, like Rocket, performed a lot of false confidence and ego to hide my insecurities, because I had to. It was a way of protecting myself, because I do heavily struggle with seeing value in myself. Please, for the love of Satan, do not leave a bunch of comments. I am not saying that to garner sympathy from random strangers on the internet. You don't know me just because you watched some art with me in it. I'm sharing it to hopefully help other people who struggle with that by talking about what has helped me. Learning to love yourself when you spend a lot of your life learning to put yourself down is, to put it mildly, difficult. It takes active choices to approach situations in new ways, to take ownership of who you are. Transition and embracing who and what I am has helped with that tremendously, because it's exceptionally hard to love yourself when you don't even see yourself in the mirror.
Don't call me a raccoon!
The name's Rocket Raccoon.
So Rocket, loving what he is, incorporating it into himself, becoming Rocket Raccoon, not denying the part of himself that he was told was shameful and lesser. That's where I think the transness of Nebula and Rocket lies. I would say finding myself was less about discovering something new and more about reconnecting myself to the parts of myself that I had denied for so long because of an oppressive system. Rocket's care for the other raccoons, for his outsider-chosen family, for the universe and all the beings in it, it's how he shows he's truly come to love himself too. Because learning to love yourself is helped by loving others. And it's okay if it's a struggle, and it's okay if it's difficult, and it's okay if there's ups and downs. Because as these films understand, healing and growth is never linear. How can it be? I always hated the idea that you aren't worthy of someone else's love until you understand exactly how to love yourself. How are you supposed to love yourself if you've never seen an example? How can you know a thing if all you have ever seen is its shadow? I deny this logic. I reject it. I say learning to love oneself is, in a way, learning to love the galaxy. Because in the end, we're just stardust, all entangled on itself.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a movie about being imperfect. It is a movie about accepting your imperfections, accepting the imperfections of those around you, and realizing that what makes you imperfect makes you the perfect person for yourself and those around you.
I think good stories need to end. You have to know when it's time to go. And Guardians of the Galaxy 3 does so beautifully.
I know I have to go.
Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. I am very proud of this one, but it is a long one, and I am actually moving in a couple days. By the time you watch this video, because it'll probably be several months after that, I have already moved, but I am very tired, and I've got a lot of blue to clean up in my my bathroom, because I blued myself. So I will finish out this video to just say, if you liked this video and my work, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. That's how I pay my bills and also pay my collaborators like ARANOCK. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Nebula using the link below if you want to support me as well and my film Identities that I hope, you know, James Gunn, if you happen to be watching this, please come to the premiere. I would love for you to be there. You're one of my favorite filmmakers. Anyways, I will stop shilling for that. Also, on top of that, please consider signing up for Nebula, not this Nebula, the streaming service Nebula down below to help support my film Identities that I'm making. But beyond all of that, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you like this video. But beyond all of it, thank you so much for watching, my friends. And as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much for watching this video, but an extra special thank you to all my patrons who make this video possible and make it possible for me to be able to pay my bills and also help pay my collaborators fairly. I could not do this without all of you, so thank you. And an extra special thank you, as always, to Carrie, Ellen, Foss, Joe, Herman, Hold, Niels, Eliasburn, Olsen, Home, Arc 10, Arc, Leos, Silly, Gray, Omi, Eos, Heather, Ratlong, Barbie Ann Round, Sarah Montgomery, Jack McCallan, Stephen Clenord, Hannah Fendrick, Christian Hirsch, Jemshin, Michael Woolnetz, Kristen Ray Kelly, Alex Miller, Chloe Dollar, Randy Thompson, Barbara Rusky, Auntie Kate, 808, Samuel Howard, Dark Archon, Matt Chung, Naisa Mary, Christine S., Brits Krieg, Super Desi, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Alicia Stice, Lily Blaney, Tara Rose, Stephen Coyle, Angela Hendricks, Meadow Whisper, Jolene Gilly, Joseph Dewey, Marshall Nye, James Krivda, Rose Conley, Zane Schussler, Dominic Noble, William Tony, Vincent Ellington, Jennifer Fuss, Weirdy Beardy, Kaylee Lang, Ruth, Sunk Corgi, Sean McKenzie, Nathaniel Fraughton, Jolene Cassidy, Sonia Nero Perdeau, Ferengito, Transit Toronto, Quattro, Lev Goodwin, Sasha M, Ryan Hunter, Teresa, Ryan Corkin, Leah Boyd, Scott Russell, Craig and David, W. Randy Edie, Shield Maiden 4444, Carry On, Damian Rice, John Weatherby, Teague Wilson, Kalara Arula, Stephen Richardson, LK, The Mighty Jin Dojo, Jade Persuades, Drew Bach, Kevin Froteg, Melinda Walters, Sean Sullivan, Lysa, Sean Piper, Matthew Craiglow, Beatrix Purvis, Jennifer Fronister Flynn, Mark H. Williams, author, Flynn N. Kanda, Devin Camelocker, Melody Ann, Winter's Good, Epsilon is Greater Than, Adam Smasher, Casual Observer, Sarah Bystem, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Patricia Crompt, Roy Negby, William Stewart, Jeffrey D. Thomas, Becky Sparks, Verdict Sky, Sarah Lemero, Katie K, Bob's Agate, Emma Ramirez, Sky Skinner, Jess Johnson, Blueberry Hill, Joe Comics, Jason Knott, Kirk Mullen, Alex Vincent, Laura Demereau, Joe Blue, Joanne the Wretch Witch, Zamula Kincaid, Zordy Lucero, Troy Stull, Valeria Blackbird, Luna, Rosalind Bennett, Celestial Dawn, The Tipsy Changeling, Grumpy Dragon 75, Tori Puritz, Hope, Jason Tuliana, Zophiel, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Crit Fax, Carolyn Clark, Clingy, Callum McLeod of the Clan McLeod, Michael Weber, Adam Ardiel Taylor, It's a Bug, Not a Feature, and Abigail Marie. Mwah. Love you all.